Candid Leadership's guest today is Colonel Daniel Blackmon, who is an Army Brigade Commander with degrees from the National War College, Naval War College, and the United States Military Academy at West Point. He was a senior fellow at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Seminar 21 on Foreign Policy, International Relations, and the National Interest. For our discussion today, what's critical is that Dan and I grew up in the Army together as leaders, and we're going to discuss knowing someone in your career path and how mentoring and sharing leadership lessons with peers is critical. Having known one another since 2002, we've grown up together in the Army. We've celebrated marriages, empathized through a divorce, watched each other's kids grow up, and most importantly, watched each other grow into the leaders we are today. Today, we'd like to share a conversation on candid leadership about the criticality of helping each other through the complexity of leadership. Dan, thanks so much for being on Candid Leadership. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here.
All right. I really want to kind of dive into some of the things that we've done over the last 20 years of kind of checking in on one another. And we've kind of gone together through multiple deployments, a couple of adding some kids to this world, our spouses and moves and jobs. And why do you think this kind of relationship between the two of us as far as peer mentors has gelled so much?
I don't know. It's been a fun one, right? Because going to school at the same time, not really knowing each other, but then, showing up in Hawaii, having kind of an interesting meeting, engagement there, and then living close to one another, even up there, and just seeing each other kind of in passing. And then, I don't know, it was kind of one of those weird deals where we kind of just grew into a friendship that honestly probably, wouldn't have happened in any other kind of profession for good reason, probably. I mean, I don't know. I'm an artillery officer, you're an intel officer, which I guess in many ways would be a natural match. But we just never, we didn't have any, I don't think we ever were really in the same unit that would have required that, with Hawaii being what it was, and then going on that deployment together, having you close in that regard in Afghanistan and just seeing you. And then we went different ways and then came back together. God, when was the next time? Was it HRC?
Yeah, I think so. And I think because we kind of had these intersections in our careers, it really allowed us to retain touch points. And that's really key for the audience to understand, is that, when you're growing with someone and you have multiple touch points, every time we've resurfaced or retouched through this, we've been able to kind of bring, hey, the last 2 or 3 jobs, this is what I've learned from those things.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I think that was what was, has always been neat, is that we're on this train track that we just keep kind of intersecting, right? And every time we intersect, there's something new, right? So we both had kids in Hawaii, but then we both went away, and then we come back together at HRC, and our kids are a little bit older, and then we, went away again, and then we come back. I think the next time we saw each other was after Battalion Command in DC. So it's been 3 or 4 year hiatus between, meeting engagements, but then when we do, it's okay, catch right back up, get right back on it. Obviously, we stayed in touch through Facebook and through messages there, and happy and sad times there. But it was always cool when we got to see each other in person again and just have a, quick conversation over coffee, or after I think the Army 10 miler, I think we ran into each other in a parking lot and then
That's
stood
right.
and talked for 15 minutes, right?
That's right. And the linearity of it's almost like a network within itself, is that over a span of time, you can see that kind of convergence together, drawing those lines. I think the railroad analogy is really good. It's that, we'll both pull into station at some point and then go off to different areas, kind of see that part of the country and then merge back together. I think that really speaks to the importance of really having a peer mentor. And I want to riff a little off that, because to talk to the audience about why it's so important to have someone at your work, because research does show that workers are happier in jobs where they have friends and coworkers. And, Dan, you're one of those people, because employees have stated, even there was a Gallup poll that stated having a close work friendship can boost employee satisfaction by 50%. And those employees are 7 times more likely to fully engage in their work. They're more creative, more production, and they stick up for you. And I think that's something, that amplification of that, Dan, and that example that you've given throughout my career has really, it's stuck. And I find that your thoughts and ideas and concerns are truly valid. Not only the conversations we've had, but then the demonstrable effort I've seen you showing. Some of those things that you've done have really inspired me, especially what I've seen lately, the work that you do on social media. How do you use social media really to your advantage with respect to mentorship?
So I have developed some mentor-mentee relationships on social media with people I've never actually met in person, which is actually, it's kind of a new thing, right? I'm not sure how productive that is all the time, but I know that in some cases it's been relatively productive because somebody can come to me not knowing who I am or even come anonymously, which has happened a couple of times, and just ask a question and try and get some feedback from an O6 in the Army. Now, are all O6s in the Army the same? No, we're all different. We all have very different perspectives. But I found that it's provided a platform where people who have genuine concerns or ideas can come and approach and talk. I mean, there's a couple of people I've had really good conversations with where either I was misunderstood or I misunderstood what they were saying, or what I put out was not what I was trying to put out, or they were trying to get clarification on something that I had said that led to an even better conversation, which I've found to be a place for growth, not just for me, but for people that I'm talking to.
That's really interesting. Can you provide an example of that?
Yeah. All right. Here's the emotional event that's been dominating social media when it comes to mill Twitter, so to speak, right? It's the ACFT, right? The ACFT has got on everybody. It's been that way since as long as I've been paying attention to it.
So for all of our listeners, that's the Army Physical Fitness Test. So
Yeah,
this is a change. And this, for those of you not in the DoD listening, this is a disruptive event. And I'm going to let you kind of speak to this, Dan. But I think it's emblematic of something that occurs in any business, any part of national security. I mean, we see it in so many different areas. A big disruption could potentially occur. And there's a lot of uncertainty. There's an emotiveness to it. So walk me through your experience, Dan.
So I'm a combat arms officer, right? So I'm surrounded by combat arms, other combat arms. And so from a perspective of what do I need for my folks when it comes to fitness, I need pretty good levels of fitness. But the emotional, and now I'm here in basic combat training where I train people who come from being civilians and have to become soldiers within 10 weeks, right?
Right.
And so I've seen people who are very fit while I was the battalion commander already in the service, and they've been in the Army for a long time. And now I've seen folks who just got off the bus and haven't hardly done any physical fitness activity in their life. And we have to take them and get them into shape in 10 weeks. And we're pretty successful at doing that. But, the population we're pulling from is generally a fairly fit population on top of that. But that's neither here nor there. The event that has the most vitriol from the population out there is the leg tuck, right? I mean, honestly, it's the one that is probably creating the most angst because it's not necessarily easy. It's not necessarily an easy thing to do.
And again, listeners, if you've never seen it, you probably have to Google it. It's not a natural fitness technique or something you've probably seen in your life. It was brand new to me when this change occurred. So by looking at this, again, shaping this into something for thought, especially for this audience, is you're introducing something into a system that was previously not demonstrated. It's new.
Yep.
That is an innovative way to change a fitness level. And I think, I'll let you continue on with this and the pertinence of this on social media, especially on Mill Twitter, Dan.
To describe the leg tuck, right? You have a pull-up bar, so to speak. You grab the pull-up bar with both hands facing the opposite direction, like you were going to pull yourself up. And then you bring your legs up and touch your knees essentially to your elbows or upper arm. And it requires some abdominal strength. It requires some upper body strength because you have to hold your body onto a bar. And it requires, honestly, some technique that you need to have. So it's not just a strength maneuver, it's also a technique maneuver. I'm sitting there having this conversation because what I said is that I believe that leg tucks can be taught effectively as long as you understood technique. And then I used my wife as an example. My wife, who's not in the military, I've taught how to do a leg tuck, which is true. I have. But I have a little bit of a coaching background, and I posted that. with the intent to say, hey, look, if you get the right coaches, you put the right emphasis on it, you have the right people who know what to do, look for, and you have somebody who has a base level of strength, which most women in the military have, you can learn how to do a leg tuck. That was just the comment I was intending to make was, hey, look, there's light at the end of the tunnel. We can do this together. We just have to have people who are dedicated to learning. And somebody popped back at me. I wish men senior leaders would stop comparing us to their wives.
Okay. So as the Twitter world goes, this was kind of probably the first shot towards you. Now, you've been a big advocate for many, many years. I'm setting the record straight here for women, especially in your branch. And so, that's the background to Dan Blackmon, and especially why he's here on Candid Leadership is I have seen Dan as a peer mentor, but also a fierce advocate. And so keep going, Dan.
Yeah. So I was kind of taken back by it, right? And I was like, holy cow, like something I just said obviously struck a nerve, and rightfully so, because I really wasn't trying to compare my wife to women in the military by any stretch of the imagination. And what I didn't really recognize at that point was I ended up having a longer conversation with this officer who was a couple months postpartum, was having some pretty significant issues, just recovering from her pregnancy, had scored upwards of 300 on her PT test her entire career, and was now having challenges mastering the leg tuck, and was really worried because she knows that the military, despite our best efforts, really takes a lot of judgment based on how physically fit you are perceived. And so here's a woman who was perceived as physically fit her entire career, but now was having a hard time with an event of the new Army combat fitness test, and was worried that was going to impact her career. And here I am, kind of flippantly saying, well, my 46-year-old wife could do it. Why can't you? It was not what I intended by any stretch of the imagination. And then it created a great conversation, and actually one that I now will bounce things off of this officer on the regular. And honestly, don't know her name. I know what she goes by on Twitter, but she's a good voice, and I appreciate that. So, it's a little bit of her leading up to some degree on how I can be a more effective mentor to women. And I'm okay with that. Like, because now if I say something that doesn't sound right, instead of getting blasted, right, she'll shoot me down and be like, hey, is that what you meant to say?
That's awesome. That just goes to really talk to the effectiveness, I think, of having people in leadership positions on social media, because it allows you we can see in many different ways, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, whatever social media platform you're on, there are some things that have been said that they revealed the heart of what someone believed, but this revealed the heart that you're willing to listen to other people and understand, hey, even though this was not my perception, this is what you took it as, and I'm growing from this. I mean, that to me is just a great example right there of how we can learn from one another through mentorship, up, down, laterally, left and right. And I really want to talk to some other areas that tie into the complex problems that you and I have talked about in our career and what we face. Because in any line of work, whether it's business, academics, national security, defense, kind of what we do in the Army specifically, we are a people organization. And with human nature as it is, there are very few simple solutions. And we've talked just by our last example, but you and I over years, decades as a matter of fact, about complex problems. And why do you think we have to frame these problems correctly before jumping into a solution? I think one of your biggest passion projects that you've had in the artillery, obviously, is getting it right and ensuring that women officers are just rocking it. So do you want to kind of riff on that for a bit, Dan?
Yeah, sure. So women in the artillery has been something I've been passionate about for a while, because I was fortunate enough to serve in the artillery before women were allowed. And I say fortunate enough because it provides me a perspective, right? Should we have had women serving in FSO jobs and platoon leader jobs when I was a lieutenant? Absolutely. Were they? No. But what it did do is it allowed me to have the perspective of what it's like being an all-male force where there are no women in those formations. And then I was also fortunate enough to be part of organizations as we shifted to change. So, going to Afghanistan, being an FSO, assigned to a fire support officer, being assigned to an infantry unit where we had no women, and we had to go into towns and we had to do things in towns where a lot of the population that we were dealing with were Afghan women. And we were just limited to what we could do. And then we'd roll back from an operation or whatever, and we'd come back to the FOB. And, right there on the FOB it was your company that had some very phenomenal women intel officers who would have been a tremendous asset to us as we went out and did our jobs. And oh, by the way, they were all physically fit, and they could have done what we were doing had they had the skills, had been taught the skills from a very young age on how to be artillery officers, and they would have been a combat multiplier. That was kind of my first eye-opening experience on why women should be and could be field artillery officers. So that kind of led me through a few things. And I ended up leaving when I left out of battery command and got promoted to major. I went back to West Point, where I was the field artillery branch rep. And that was when we first started really recruiting women into the artillery. And so I had a whole lot of conversations with young women who were thinking about branching field artillery. And at that point, they could branch field artillery, but they still could not be fire support officers, which, are the folks who hang out with the infantry officers and the armor officers in those units, calling for fire and bring in fires. But they could go into artillery units. They just couldn't do those jobs. So they could be platoon leaders on the gun line, but they couldn't be fire support officers. Well, that's half of your job. And honestly, if you're going to be a field artillery battalion commander later in your life, you better know how to do fires from a perspective of planning and executing at the higher echelon. And so that's half of the job that you do as an artillery officer is that. So they were missing out on half of their jobs.
And this was about the time frame of, I want to say, 06, 07? What year?
I was in DMI, Department of Military Instruction at West Point, in the summer of 2007.
Okay.
And I left in the early winter of 2010. And
so laws were still in place at this time, prohibiting
right.
women from serving in frontline units.
Yeah.
And specifically, they were not allowed to be infantry officers. And so this really speaks, audience, to change. I mean, we were a part of seeing history change. And here Dan is, he's had this experience, knowing there's a gap, and then working to really kind of set the precedents and circumnavigate through starting this really huge shift within our service. Go ahead, Dan.
One of the things that I had when I was at West Point was a group of us started having a workout group that met every morning before class. And we had a pretty good group of cadets that came in to work out with us. And we had women that were coming in, young women cadets that were coming in, doing the workouts with us. And they were leaders inside the Corps of Cadets. And you could there's just something you can tell about people when they're good natural leaders. But they were coming in, they're physically fit, they were natural leaders. And when I talked to them about what they were going to branch, the idea that they might go artillery wasn't on their radar, because they knew they couldn't really move up in the ranks in the artillery because they were prohibited from being fire support officers. And the only thing that they could do was, if they went to a unit that required that, they could just stay at the battery level, the battalion level, and never get half of what they were supposed to do. Or they could go to the rocket battalions and rocket units out there where they could do all the jobs there. But essentially, a significant portion of the artillery was closed off to them. And I thought that we were missing a lot. We were missing opportunities for some pretty good leaders because they just wouldn't go that route. I was fortunate enough to get a couple who decided, hey, they saw the writing on the wall, knew that this was something that was probably going to change, and were willing to risk it. And then they came in anyway. And then they've actually, they're doing really well now. And it's fun to watch, because through various means, I can keep track of them. And they're getting close. I mean, I think we've got a couple now that are almost majors, and they're doing great. But we're still 10 years away from battalion commanders who are women in the artillery, which is, oh, by the way, probably 15 years away from that being the case with infantry and armor. So at least we're ahead, but it's a mixed bag.
That's the problem with complex problems, is sometimes there are things that take time to mature, right? But then there are also things with complex problems that you can start to create and innovate and work on solutions now. And so what are those things that you've started to see, like changes that occur within an organization that you've seen people get after and execute, and it's made a lot of difference? Just like someone reaching out to you on, after a Twitter post. I mean, that made a huge difference. Within a matter of minutes, you're facing a mental change that, hey, I can just say this differently and it would mean the world to someone. What are those things that you've started to see that rather than taking a half decade or so to mature, activities or experiences with really problem reframing?
That's the challenge of anything we do in the military when it comes to how we're going to get after the problem, is that we're a massive bureaucracy, right? And for good reason, I think, in many ways. But what it takes is people to be the bridge in this case. So I recognize that I am a 47-year-old white male, right? I cannot be the champion for women in the military, and I shouldn't be. But I am in a position of leadership. Because of that, I have to be at least be an advocate as much as possible until we have 47-year-old women in leadership, in the artillery specifically, who can then champion it themselves. And you've got to have that time. And through the time, you've got to have the ability and the longevity to keep pulling. So, I have fewer years ahead of me in the Army than I do behind me. And I don't have probably enough time in the military to pull that young, high-speed field artillery woman along into battalion command. But I can build the bridge to somebody else behind me who can then pick up the baton and continue to run until we can get her there or them there in multiples. Because that's what's going to take. Because only then will we get there.
Right. I'm going to challenge something you just said because you are an advocate and I have seen that. And I think your encouragement of other advocates is pertinent. Hearing those voices and here on Candid Leadership, knowing my audience is very mixed, both in national security, men and women. My stamp of approval with Dan Blackmon is the fact that you've been that advocate and you've taken the baton forward in the method of you've talked to peers. And I'm sure you've had those conversations. You've talked to peers and helped to change minds. But the other thing that you've done as a leader is you've started to open people's eyes to the awareness. And I think we've had conversations with things that don't necessarily impact a large number of males in the military, but strike right to the heart of dual military couples, single parents, and mothers out there, in the fact that some of the impediments, it stems around what we're experiencing right now amidst this pandemic, and that is childcare.
Yeah, childcare. It's another one of my things that gets me fired up, right? So I right now command a brigade that has 24-hour, 7-day a week, 365-day mission. Basic combat training doesn't stop. And when the pandemic kicked off, we didn't slow down, and we couldn't afford to. The reason being is because the Army still needs people to come into it. So even in a pandemic environment, we didn't get to slow down. My authorizations in my brigade is that 1/4 of my cadre drill sergeants are women. So I have to have that because we train women in basic combat training, and I have to have women drill sergeants to set the example, to lead, and to just be drill sergeants. And they're phenomenal at it. Some of them are single parents or dual military parents. And in this case, when you have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job, there are times when childcare doesn't exist past, 1700, 5 o'clock in the afternoon on military installations, which, oh, by the way, is a little weird to me. And so they're having to go find, in some cases, overnight childcare off the installation. And I think it's a travesty. I think we should be better at that. We should do better. We do this in the military. There are places that do this, but the fact that it's not like resident in every single one of our places is something I think we need to do better at. If we're really going to if we say people first, we have to mean it. And that's one of the things that every installation I've been to, our childcare is not as good as it could be. It's gotten better, but I think we've got to do a better job of it.
Right,
because what ends up happening is that it forces families to make decisions that I believe they maybe shouldn't have to make when it comes to getting in, staying out, where they're going to live. And that drives community effort. Talk about a thing that's multi-layered, right? If I know that I can live on post and have 24-hour childcare, or at least better childcare, there's a chance I will. If I don't know that, and I know that I have to get it somewhere else, I'm going to choose to live in a different place, and then I might be a commuter. Well, anytime that happens, if I increase the commuting capability of ICE people living on post, then there's less of a need for childcare on post, which means we don't put any money into it. And if you don't put any money into it, it doesn't get any better. So, it's like this self-looking ice cream cone of what do we have to fix? And I think that's one of those things that we could fix and have a really, really significant impact in just retention, how folks stay, want to be a part of the military. Recruiting, oh, by the way, helps, right? If you're going to be supported that way, it'll help us keep people closer to installations. And when you keep people closer to installations, the community is more involved. And so, it just continues to grow out from there. And so that's one of those complex things that I think a small tweak in the childcare world would have a large impact on. And I think we're doing better. I think it's being recognized now, but the reason it's being recognized, honestly, is because there's a large voice of women out there right now that are saying this is a big issue. And finally, there's some people who are listening.
Yeah, I agree. And I will tell you, over the years, so many women worked different methods, different ways to make it work and have it appear as being seamless. But I've had au pairs not show up. I've had nannies. I had two, Dan knows, my babies came out big, 10 pounders. They were big babies. And to the point where I had one daycare provider, she's like, I just can't watch your son anymore. He's too big for me to pick up. He was just a big boy. So I've had a number of childcare failures. And thanks to the supportive people I worked with who gave me space, some did, some leaders didn't. And the NoFail mission that we are in the military, it's critical. And we're seeing this right now. And I've seen it with a number of people that I mentor. It's just how many women have had to leave the workforce and the longitudinal implication of that. And that's the part that concerns me right now is the future. We need to support each other from the workforce. I really do recommend Nora Hertz's book, The Lonely Century, How to Restore Human Connection in a World That's Pulling Us Apart. She really talks to the criticality of having friends at work. And this is kind of something that Dan and I are talking through right now. But you'll remain at your organization, your location, your workforce, if people can empathize with you and understand what you're going through and the criticality of your needs. I think there are so many different areas that you've spoken on, Dan, with this Army experience. But what are some of those other areas that you've really talked to encourage men to mentor the entirety of their workforce on?
Here's something that, we keep going back to, and I keep meaning to jump in on it because it's important. Because we talked earlier about peer mentorship and how that plays out. I think one of the beauties of peer mentorship is the ability, and it goes beyond men and women. It goes into some of the other extremism stuff, right? You're a good friend of mine who can provide me with a perspective for women that I don't have. But what's cool about that is that I also know that I can come to you and ask you, hey, this is how I feel about something. How do you see it? And you can provide that back to me from a perspective of he's genuinely asking because he cares, and I can give him that feedback without worries of retribution.
Right.
Because I know he's coming from a place of trust, and that I'm going to return the advice from a place of trust too. Trust that he's not going to take it as an insult when I tell him that he's being stupid or that he's not seeing it the right way, but also trust in that he's going to receive it in the fashion in the way it was meant to be given, because I'm allowed to hear it from that same perspective. This is true with people who don't look like me. One of my really good friends is a brigade commander out in a division out in 1st Armored Division. And he's a black officer, and we've been friends for a long time. But honestly, I had some great conversations with him and his wife about race, because there's things that I either don't see, I can't see, things that have been enlightening to me. And then I'll ask him, and I know that I'll ask him some questions. He'll ask me questions. We'll go back and forth. He's from Maryland. I'm from Texas, right? His wife, my wife are really good friends. Politically, we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but it doesn't mean because we know that we love each other and care about each other and care about each other's families, we can have honest, real conversations that will further our relationship and also kind of further our vision of what we see. I think there's this idea that you have to agree with everybody. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think you have to agree with them. Just think you need to recognize that their perspective is different than yours. And I think that's an important part of peer mentorship, moving the ball forward and continuing to have conversations that matter from a leadership perspective, because it allows the thing that is the most important thing, which is the empathy that you need to have as a leader when you're talking to somebody who is just different than you, but in the same field.
Exactly. Because we're a part of a profession. And that is the exciting part of our job. Wherever you land in national security, whether you're in Department of Defense or working anywhere else, even in business, if you feel connected to the people that are around you and you can have conversations, heartfelt conversations about things that are going on, I think some of the divisiveness will start to subside. And exactly, you don't have to agree with everyone on everything. That's not the point of having a peer mentor. Having a peer mentor is you're opening someone's eyes and you're opening the door to them as well. I think, when we were at HRC together, Human Resources, and we worked in this organization, because we could mentor one another, we showed each other different mechanisms, different ways to maneuver in and about this system of placing people in jobs and locations. We had an empathy also for people that we were helping from that location. Yep. Fast forward to when we're in the Pentagon in DC, and we could open the door to projects that each of us were working on, or the ability to understand a decision maker better. And that's the criticality of having a peer mentor.
Absolutely, 100%. And Pentagon's a whole nother ball of wax, right? Because you've got civilians, you've got military, you have all 4 services. And by the way, now 5 services, right? And all of us have our own cultures. The further you go up in this, the further you got to change your view. And I was fortunate enough to go to National War College, where, a significant number of the people who are in that course are not even in the military. They're just in other forms of national security. Then I got to talk to them, and they have a completely different perspective. And then, flipped into that seminar 21, the MIT seminar, which was even more fascinating because there were people there from all walks of life there as well. And just hearing different perspectives about the same issue has been something I've enjoyed. But it's also developing networks outside the military in some cases, to change your pattern of thought and see the bigger picture, which I think is invaluable.
That's awesome. Dan, thanks for this conversation. Is there anything else you want to add to our listeners?
I think if I had a 5-minute spiel about almost anything, and I'm not going to go 5 minutes, but if I had my little elevator pitch on anything, it's to go and seek out opportunities to grow. I'm now in a position where I have, like I said, young soldiers or civilians coming in to be soldiers, and they walk. And at the end of it, I do an after-action review of the entire 10-week cycle. And in that after-action review, I harp down on 2 separate things. The first thing I harp in on is how really special those who decided to serve their country are. And there's a whole statistical thing I could run down. I'm not going to do it here. But bottom line, they really are a special group of people. And I appreciate the fact that they're willing to dedicate at least a portion of their lives to service. The second thing that I tell them is that it's incumbent upon them to take a look around the room, find people that don't look like them, and become friends with them, because that's how we'll move this ball forward. Because it allows you to have a perspective that is not just linear. And by doing that, we as a force, the Army, the DOD, or whatever, can drive some social change, because we live in a place where we are viewed as an honorable profession. And so if we can do better, then we can drive it forward a little bit together. Because the Chief of Staff has said it a number of times, one of our biggest strengths that we have in the military is our diversity. And it's just inherent who we are. And by leveraging that diversity, we can actually drive the ball forward for the nation, which I think is an important thing to do.
Awesome. Dan, thanks so much for being on Candid Leadership.
Thanks, Candice. Appreciate it. It's good talking to you, and look forward to having more conversations.
Absolutely. That was Colonel Blackmon. If you want to learn more about him, go to LinkedIn. I really appreciate you listening to this conversation. If you want more candid perspectives on leadership, go to www.colonelcandid.com. There, you'll find articles, podcasts, and resources for your leadership journey. I would also encourage you to share this podcast with your friends, colleagues, and whoever you think could benefit from the information and wisdom shared by my amazing guests. I know I grow with every conversation, and we want to share that experience with as many leaders as we can. This show grows by word of mouth, so be sure to share this podcast. And if you think I've earned it, leave me a 5-star review. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Colonel Candace Frost.